Good evening. It's good to be with you tonight. Our study will be in Isaiah 4, beginning this evening. While you're turning there, I would like to ask Brother Pettingill, if you would, to please turn to Jeremiah, chapter 23, and verse 5. I believe that's the only verse. Let me check that out real quick. Jeremiah 23. Yeah, make that verses 5 and 6, please. And how about you, Justin? Would you read Jeremiah 33, verses 14 to 16? And I need someone else to volunteer. Chris, how about Zechariah 6, verse 11 through 13? And we'll read those in just a moment. We really haven't gotten to the call of Isaiah yet. He's just kind of getting warmed up. So we haven't even got to chapter 5 yet. And he's still warming up in chapter 5. Doesn't actually get his call and accept his role fully until we get into chapter 6. But I think he's done a pretty good job setting the stage for his ministry. Most Bible scholars would agree that verse 1 of chapter 4 belongs in chapter 3, and why there is a chapter break here is beyond me. I mean, when you understand why the chapter breaks were set up and the verses that they were set up, it was made so that we could reference and find verses and passages much easier, and that certainly is the case here. But verse 1 of chapter 4 really, truly belongs in that long description of judgment that was to be brought against Israel. And so I want to begin with verse 1, and then we'll start with verse 2 in a moment after we make a few comments. You do recall that last week, as we were ending chapter 3, the prophecy was pretty much directed toward the northern nation of Israel, or Jacob, as he called them there. And he's speaking of the judgment that was to be meted out against them because of their idolatry and their injustice and their mistreatment of the poor. But then he summarizes the conditions that would exist as a result of God's judgment. In verse 1 of chapter 4, he says, "In that day 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, 'We will eat our own food and wear our own clothes. Only let us be called by your name to take away our reproach.'" Let me ask you, why would women all run after this one guy? Why would 7 women cling to one man? What would cause them to want to do that? No, they weren't looking for money. They had their own clothes. They had their own food. They didn't need anything other than children. So why go after this one guy? Maybe he was bald-headed. I don't know. Why did they all want just one man? Why 7 women for one guy? That's exactly right. When judgment comes against a nation like that, particularly in that day and time, and war was fought, who typically fought in those wars? Well, men that you would call on or count on to bear children in the home. And they were no longer, because they died fighting these unwholesome and very destructive wars against their enemies as a result of God's judgment. And so now we have 7 women saying, we'll take the name of this one man. They'll all be married. They'll basically be Mormons. And we will marry this one guy so that we will not have this a reproach. In other words, they did not want to be childless. I want you to think about that for a minute. When you look throughout Old Testament history in particular, and you read about Hebrew women, Jewish women, what was the one thing they feared most? Not having a child. Particularly, not having a male child. That was a great blessing to have a male child. Even Mother Eve would say in the very dawn of time, I've gotten a man from the Lord. And so it began with Eve and it continued. And so by the time you get to the people of Israel, they're still saying it was still the thing of their day for women to have children. We were having a discussion in ethics in one of my classes yesterday We have to take so many hours of training to continue to be peace officers. And I was in training this week, and we were having a lengthy discussion on ethics in our class. And the instructor for our class was discussing things that were happening in the news, and for whatever reason, this abortion issue was on his mind. And I would assume it's because he, like me, and anyone else that pays attention to the news knows that's what's going on today. It's a major issue once again in the forefront. And he was asking the question, is it ever right to kill a baby? And most everyone there said, well, no, it's never right. And one man, Country Bumpkin, I would call him, he's been an officer for many years, good old boy, we might call him. He goes to church every Sunday. Well, I think if a woman was raped, we wouldn't want to make her have to put up with a baby. I reckon it's all right. I'm like, no one really responded except me. I've been in trouble a lot this week because I've just decided I'm not going to be quiet anymore. And I told my commanding officer yesterday, I think that's what's wrong with you, and that's what's wrong with everyone in this room. That's what's wrong with this entire culture of ours. We hear this insanity and we don't say anything about it. We're afraid somebody might think we're crazy. I said, I don't care what you all think about me. It's never right to kill a baby, period. Babies are innocent. But we've reached a point. In fact, he went on to elaborate. I didn't tell you the worst of it. He said, well, I think ultimately it's a woman's right, and we don't want to take away a woman's right. Well, we're talking about women's rights. Look at the women of Israel who had suffered the judgment of God. They were willing to marry one guy, 7 of them, just to be married and have someone to bear children with, because they did not want to have a reproach. They did not want to be childless. They considered having children a great blessing, and indeed, having children is a tremendous blessing. Now, probably in the coming days, you might imagine, I may be preaching some sermons on the great blessing that children can be. In fact, again in the news, a recent elected official from New York, who just cost New York billions of dollars and many jobs, and she is a avowed, open, proud socialist, was actually suggesting in one of her news feeds just this past week also that we should stop having children because we have to think about Mother Earth and protecting the environment and promoting her Green Deal. This is getting out of hand. And the problem is, it's getting out of hand because people like us with our Christian worldview are sitting back silently, either ignorantly, not having any idea what's happening to our world, or indifferently, shame on us if that's the case, or out of fear, shame on us if we're afraid. We need to start speaking up. And you hear something insane, say, that's not right, that's insane. God's not pleased with that. We need to tell people and remind them, God is not pleased with that. And I know he's not pleased with that because the Bible tells me so. And stop being afraid to take a stand. That's what's wrong in our world, is that too many of these atrocities are taking place and nobody's saying anything. Thankfully, most everyone agree with me. I don't care if they did or not. They could throw me out of the class. I'm just tired of hearing this stuff talked about and no one having the courage to stand up and say, that's just not right. I'm sorry, you may be a good old boy, you may go to church every Sunday, but you are dead wrong when you say a woman has a right to murder her baby. It's unconscionable. And I'm sorry that we have reached that stage in our culture. Any questions or comments about women having children? Okay, good. In verse 2 of chapter 4, this is a very lengthy chapter for Isaiah. It's all of 6 verses. But this is very important. In that day, the branch. By the way, does anyone have a lowercase b spelling for branch? You have a lowercase b spelling? What version do you have? The English Standard Version? I have a King James and it's uppercase B. Okay, we'll say more about that in a moment. But in that day the branch of the Lord shall be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and appealing for those of Israel who have escaped. Now, I want you to kind of bear with me here. Just hold that thought. Escaped what? Now, if you were in Judah or Israel at the time that Isaiah was saying this, what do you think he was talking about? What do you think? How would you hear these words? I just want you to think about that. For those of Israel who have escaped. And it shall come to pass that he who is left in Zion and remains in Jerusalem will be called holy. Everyone who is recorded among the living in Jerusalem. Which Jerusalem? When the Lord has washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion and purged the blood of Jerusalem from her midst by the spirit of judgment, which we just read about, and by the spirit of burning, which we'll say more about, then the Lord will create above every dwelling place of Mount Zion and above her assemblies a cloud and smoke by day and the shining of a flaming fire by night. For over all the glory there will be a covering, and there will be a tabernacle for shade in the daytime from the heat, for a place of refuge and for a shelter from storm and rain. Commentators seem to be at odds with each other as to what this reference to the branch is. Some are suggesting that the branch is simply a designation or symbolic representation of a different period of time. We just read about the judgment of God and how it impacts the people of Israel. Well, now we're reading about a time when restoration has occurred. Things have been reversed as a result of God's mercy and, of course, his grace. Things have been turned around. And so the branch of the Lord refers to a period of time when there is restoration and rebuilding, and Israel once again at peace and prospering, etc., etc. There's another school of thought of which I'm a member, and it's not the former, but it's this other view, and he's talking about something very different than something of a fleshly nature. He speaks of the branch of the Lord. Now, when you read in, is it Zechariah? Yeah, let's start with Zechariah. No, we'll end with Zechariah. Let's start with Jeremiah. Jeremiah 23 and verse 5 and 6. Who has that? Yes, sir. Would you mind reading that?
Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will raise unto David a righteous branch, and a king shall reign and prosper, and shall execute judgment and justice in the earth. In his day Judah shall be saved, and Israel shall dwell safely. And this is his name whereby he shall be called, the Lord our righteousness.
That's a pretty bold name, isn't it? The Lord our righteousness. God's going to raise up a branch for David. And in that day, Judah and Israel will be saved. That's what Isaiah is describing here. Jeremiah came 100 years or so after Isaiah, so we're talking about some time has elapsed, but it's the same message, the same idea. And so we have both prophets speaking of a day when this branch would come along, and this branch is also going to be a king. Right? Isn't that what he said? Now, while you're thinking on these things, I want you to remember something that the apostles asked Jesus just before he ascended back into heaven. What did they ask him, are you willing to do now? Are you willing to do what? Restore the kingdom to Israel. How do you suppose they read these passages? What was their thought process? What were they looking for? When they thought about Judah and Israel being saved, when they thought about this period of time when the branch, who is the king, would reign in righteousness and peace, what were they thinking?
An earthly king.
Exactly, an earthly king and an earthly kingdom. They were Zionists, as we use that term today. We have many of them still around, but they're looking at things from a purely physical standpoint. And I don't believe that Isaiah really, he may have that in mind, that may be kind of one of those dual prophecy things where he's thinking in terms, he will deal with this later, He will elaborate on this later as he speaks about Judah going into Babylonian captivity, later returning from Babylonian captivity. And it could be that there's a sense in which these words would apply to that period of time, but he's using the expression, the branch. And Jeremiah tells us the branch comes from David. He's the king, and his name is what? What is his name? The Lord our righteousness. Now, who's that? Who's the Lord our righteousness? It's deity, right? It's God. So he calls the branch there the Lord our righteousness. How about Jeremiah 23, verses 14 to 16? Who has that? Do you have that, Chris? Who does? 33? No, yeah, chapter 33, verse 14 and 16.
Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I fulfill the promise I made to the house of Israel and the house of Judah. In those days, at that time, I will cause a righteous branch to spring up for David. He shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In those days, Judah will be saved, and Jerusalem will dwell securely. And this is the name in which it will be called, the Lord is our righteousness. From that tree we will be.
Okay, same idea. But again, he's going to bring about the righteous branch from David, and he's going to reign, and he'll be called the Lord our righteousness. Now, how about Zechariah 6, 11 to 13?
Take from them silver and gold and make a crown, and set it on the head of Joshua the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and say to him, Thus says the Lord of hosts, Behold, the man whose name is the branch, for he shall branch out from his place, and he shall build the temple of the Lord. It is he who shall build the temple of the Lord, and shall bear royal honor, and shall sit and rule on his throne. And there shall be a priest on his throne, and the counsel of peace shall be between them both.
He shall be a priest on his throne. Is that what he said?
Yeah. There shall be a priest on his throne.
Okay. So, are you reading from the English Standard Version?
Yeah.
Okay. I think the King James is probably a little clearer there when he does say simply that he will be a priest on his throne. But nevertheless, notice what the branch there is doing. The branch is building something. What's the branch building? The temple of the Lord. When Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And you remember what they said to him. But who do you say that I am? And Peter said, You are. He didn't call him the branch. He said, You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus turned to Peter and said, Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father which is in heaven. You shall be called Peter, and upon this rock I'm going to do what? And so Zechariah said he's going to build this temple, this dwelling place, this house, this church. He's going to do that. And he's going to be a priest. And he's going to be a king. And so we have the branch. And there's no question in my mind that the branch is a messianic prophecy. We're talking here about the fact that God is going to save Judah and Israel. But now, who is this Judah and Israel? Just hold that thought. I want you to remember, too, he makes a reference here of that period of time that God is going to be a cloud by day and a fiery cloud by night. What is that a reference to? That when they left Egypt, God went before them, and he went before them in the daytime as a cloud. And what does the cloud represent to Israel? What did it represent? God's presence. And I will dwell with them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And so, where does God dwell today? And so he dwells here, and he's also that fiery cloud at night. And that fiery cloud sometimes would stand between Israel and her enemies, as it was in the case of the pursuing Egyptians. But certainly would provide light and leadership. And certainly God is that. I am the light of the world. And so we certainly see all of these things coming to pass. And we're using prophetic language here. I do believe you could argue, and many do, this has nothing to do with the Messiah. I don't believe that's correct. I don't believe the expression, the branch, is just out there by itself. in this one isolated instance. In every other instance, we know clearly is a reference to Jesus. Why would this be out here by itself and not be in some way connected? Of course it is. And of course we have already seen and will continue to see in the prophecy of Isaiah that there may be a double meaning. It could be that he is referring to that period of time when Judah would return from captivity and would rebuild the temple, and there would be somewhat of a rebuilding of their own culture and religion, etc. And maybe that's what he's referring to. But I believe ultimately, clearly, he's talking about something far more significant. Any questions about chapter 4 before we move into chapter 5? All right. Brother Tom, we have already arrived at chapter 5, and we are making progress. All right. Well, hold on. We may get bogged down. Isaiah said, "Let me sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved regarding his vineyard. My well-beloved has a vineyard on a very fruitful hill. He dug it up, cleared out its stones, planted it with the choicest vine. He built a tower in its midst, and also made a winepress in it. So he expected it to bring forth good grapes, but it brought forth wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge please between me and my vineyard. What more could have been done to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Why then, when I expected it to bring forth good grapes, did it bring forth wild grapes? And now, please, let me tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away its hedge, and it shall be burned. Break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will lay it waste, it shall not be pruned or dug, but there shall come up briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain on it, for the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his pleasant plant. He looked for justice, but behold oppression, for righteousness, but behold a cry for help." Now let's just pause here. Let's take a moment to note who these individuals are in this poem. Obviously, the beloved is a reference to God. And God has planted a vineyard. The vineyard, of course, is a reference to who? He says so. The vineyard of the Lord of the hosts is Israel. And the men of Judah are his pleasant plant. That's verse 7. Now, this metaphor is used in a number of passages, even in the Old Testament. For example, in the 80th Psalm, in verse 8 beginning, Psalm 80, verse 8, the psalm writer is again referring to Israel, to the people of God, and of God's justice against them. He said, "You brought a vine out of Egypt." It's almost like he's now suggesting this vine has been transplanted, which they were. "You brought a vine out of Egypt. You cast out the nations and planted it. You prepared room for it, caused it to take deep root, and it filled the land. The hills were covered with its shadow, and the mighty cedars with its boughs. She sent out with her bow to the sea and her branches to the river. Why have you broken down her hedges?" the psalm writer is asking, "so that all who pass by the way pluck her fruit. The boar out of the woods uproots it, and the wild beast of the field devours it. Return, we beseech you, O God of hosts. Look down from heaven and see, and visit this vine, and the vineyard which your right hand has planted, and the branch that you made strong for yourself. It is burned with fire, it is cut down. They perish at the rebuke of your countenance." The psalm writer is disturbed because God has removed the hedges. And so now Israel is vulnerable to attack. And the psalm writer is saying, hey, come back and rebuild those hedges again. What did God just say here in Isaiah chapter 5? Let me tell you what I'm going to do to my vineyard. The first thing he said I'm going to do is take away its hedge. I'm going to remove its protective shield so that it will be vulnerable to attack. I hope everyone's paying attention, because there's a powerful lesson for all of us if we're just paying attention. And so God said, I've got this beautiful plant, I planted it, and I've produced all this stuff for it to make it grow and prosper, and indeed it did. But now I'm going to remove its protective barrier. And all these others are going to come in and plunder her fruit. And the reason God said I'm going to do that is because I planted this vineyard with an intention in mind. I wanted to come to this vineyard and I wanted to find pleasant fruit to eat. But instead, I didn't come to find sweet fruit, sweet grapes. I came and found sour grapes. In fact, they weren't just sour, they were poisonous. You couldn't eat them. You'd get sick. If you ate too many of them, you'd die. So rather than producing what God wanted them to produce, they're producing the opposite of what God intended for them to produce. Now with that thought in mind, listen to what Jesus said in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 12, beginning at verse 1. Jesus began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard and set a hedge around it, dug a place for the vine back and built a tower. He leased it to the vine dressers and went into a far country. Now, at vintage time, he sent a servant to the vine dressers that he might receive some of the fruit of the vineyard from the vine dressers. And they took him and beat him, sent him away empty-handed. Again, he sent them another servant, and at him they threw stones, wounded him in the head, and sent him away shamefully treated. And again, he sent another, and him they killed, and many others, beating some and killing some. Therefore, still having one son, his beloved, he also sent him to them last, saying, they will respect my son. But those vine dressers said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. So they took him and killed him and cast him out of the vineyard. Therefore, what will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the vine dressers and give the vineyard to others. What is Jesus talking about? What is he saying in this parable? Does anyone know?
Probably after getting rid of the Jews that destruction of Jerusalem and bringing the Gentiles in for his people.
Indeed, he's going to give the vineyard to somebody else. And that somebody else would be going to all the world and preach the gospel to all creatures. That's where it began. Because it's going to be far-reaching now, not just limited to the Jews. But who are these servants that are beat up and rocks are thrown at their head and they're killed and shamefully treated? Who are they? Prophets. God sent them over and over and over and over. And preachers are coming and preachers are going, and they just keep on down that sordid path. They're not changing course. Finally, God says, I'm just going to send my son. And what did they do when the son came? Crucify him. When Jesus was on the way to Golgotha, a group of women were following behind him. They were ministering to him as they had been doing for some time. And they were weeping, no doubt, and wailing. And Jesus turned to them and he said, don't weep for me. Weep for what, did he say? Do you remember? Weep for the miseries that are going to come upon this place. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he was saying. In fact, those that were crying to Pilate, crucify him. Why? What evil has he done? Well, let his blood be upon us and upon our children. In 70 AD, the Romans came in vicious fashion, and they utterly destroyed the city of Jerusalem, killed hundreds of thousands of Jews. It was a horrible bloodbath. And the Romans put an end to the Jewish state. It didn't exist. And there's only really kind of a semblance of it now since, 1948? A modern-day Israel, but it's nothing like what we envision or read about in the Bible, but nevertheless, this was an utter destruction. And it was predicted. Jesus said it's going to happen because God's doing everything he possibly can for his vineyard. And he's looking for good fruit, and what does he receive instead? Now let's listen, with all of that said, let's listen to another familiar passage. In John chapter 15, Jesus says something, and this is really what we need to let sink into our hearts. I am the true vine. So should we be with Glenn Beck, John Hagee, screaming in defense of modern-day national Israel because they are the vineyard of the Lord and they are God's pleasant plant, and anyone who speaks against God's pleasant plant will receive the wrath of God, to quote John Hagee? Or is Jesus making a claim here that we should pay attention to? What did Jesus just say? I'm the true vine. It's me. And my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. There's that fruit metaphor again. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. What is pruning? You got to cut back sometime, don't you? Clear away the dead. Make way for new life. You are already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. This is an interesting play on words, isn't it? Because we just started this discussion by noting that the Old Testament references to the branch is a reference to who? To Jesus. But now, who are the branches? Those who follow Jesus, who is the true vine. Interesting how these metaphors are used. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit. For without me, how much are you going to get done? If anyone does not abide in me, he is cast out as a branch and is withered, and they gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, you will ask what you desire, it shall be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, so you will be my disciples. Here's that fruit-bearing thing again. So God in the Old Testament planted a different vineyard there. It was the old Israel. It was the old Judah. God planted this pleasant plant. And God built a hedge around it. God dug the earth around it. God fertilized it. God did everything he could to see to it that this vine produced the appropriate fruit. But when he came to eat of its fruit, he couldn't eat it. And Jesus is simply saying to you, and he's saying to me, I'm the vine and you are the branches. I'm a branch, you're a branch, we're all branches. And we're looked at individually as individual branches. And as branches, we have a responsibility to bear fruit. What happens if our branch never has any fruit on it? Is that what he expected us to do? Be fruitless? We got to bear fruit, right? Now, these are some really important points to ponder, because as you read chapter 5, God's using this poetic language in a sense, almost like a song. And he's speaking about the vineyard and what the beloved did as he planted the vineyard, what he expected. But listen to this plaintive cry on God's part. What more could I have done? When you think about, let's put it in practical terms. When you think about what God did for Israel, what did he do? Well, the psalm writer reminded us. He took this vineyard, he took this vine out of Egypt. And so he delivered them from slavery. So they've been oppressed by the Egyptians, mistreated by the Egyptians. And now they're granted freedom. And God leads them, literally, as a father would lead a small child, holding them by the hand, and he leads them out of Egypt. And they come to the Red Sea, and he leads them through the Red Sea. And they come to the foot of Mount Sinai, and he speaks to them, and he gives them a law, and he gives them the instruction for the tabernacle. They build it, and now they're ready to go into the land of Canaan. He did all of that for them. Just days into their journey, they started complaining, what are we going to drink? He gave them water from a rock. What are we going to eat? He made bread literally appear on the ground. All they had to do was go pick it up. And when the bread was not appreciated, he sent quails among them. Of course, because they complained, God said, you're going to eat so much, it's going to come out your nostrils. I mean, I feel that way at Thanksgiving sometimes. You eat so much, like, God said, you're going to eat so much, it's going to come out your nostrils. But he gave them a good and a holy law. There's no nation that's been blessed, Moses said, as this nation has been blessed, with such just and holy law. He protected and shielded them from all their enemies. When they wandered astray, he brought them back. Again, to quote Jeremiah 25, verse 4, he said, the Lord has sent to you all his servants, the prophets, rising early and sending them. But you have not listened nor inclined your ear to hear. They said, repent now, everyone, of his evil way and his evil doings, and dwell in the land that the Lord has given to you and your fathers forever and ever. Do not go after other gods to serve them and worship them, and do not provoke me to anger with the works of your hands, and I will not harm you. Yet you have not listened to me, says the Lord, that you might provoke me to anger with the works of your hands, to your own hurt. You're just hurting yourself. Why are you doing this? I'm compelled to ask, as we make this a little more personal, what about us? Has God done anything for us? Kind of a rhetorical question, isn't it? It's a very rhetorical question. Has God done anything for you today? What's God done for anybody today? Name one thing. What did God do for you? Woke you up. Okay. Gave you air to breathe. Your heart's beating. Got you here safely. I took CPR class today. Learned how to do CPR on infants. That's kind of creepy, but I learned how to do it. But you know, you understand just how fragile the human body is. You could be standing there 1 minute and fall out the next and cardiac arrest, and somebody got to bring you back to life, or try to preserve your life till someone come along and help you. But yeah, the fact that your heart's beating right now, you're sitting here listening to me ramble on. I mean, that's a blessing, and that's God granting you that privilege. I don't suppose there's a Lord's Day I remember ever being at a worship service that someone didn't say, in fact, multiple times, God, thank you for the gift of your son. Is that appropriate? Absolutely it is. I mean, what greater gift could there be? And the gift of his son does what for us? Frees us from sin. He's given us the gospel to make us complete. He's given us every good and every perfect gift. He's assured us with eternal glory and bliss to follow this life. He even disciplines us when we need it. The Hebrew writer reminds us. He gives us everything. And stuff that we don't even stop many times to think about. But daily, God loads us with benefits. Is it really too much for God to expect that those branches of his should be producing fruit? Any questions or comments about the vine and the branch?
Jeremiah talked to that years later.
Yes?
With Judah specifically.
Let's hear it.
You said, I will not transgress, but upon every high hill and under every green tree, the wonder plagues the harvest. Yet I planted thee a noble vine, holy and right seed. How then are you turned to the degenerate plant and a strange vine unto thee?
That's tragic, isn't it? They ruined themselves. You know, when you look at verse 7 of our reading tonight, I don't want to, our time I see now is almost expired. So I didn't realize, I had no idea. I thought we had just started tonight. I'm being honest with you. I've been in class all week, so my brain is like in granny gear, I guess. So I'm not really thinking as quickly as I normally think. I had no idea the class was almost over. This is insane. But anyway, I was just getting started. But verse 7, if you look at what he says about his pleasant plan, he looked for justice, but behold oppression, for righteousness, behold a cry for help. You know, Brother Mitchum is reminding us on Sunday mornings about this great nation that God has so richly blessed. My, oh my, how God has blessed us. I mean, we enjoy God-given freedoms more than any nation, I suppose, that's ever been on the earth. And what have we done with these great blessings? We literally have individuals elected to lead the legislative branch and the executive branch and the judicial branch, elected and appointed, openly seeking to destroy and overturn the very apparatus that providentially, as our forefathers suggested, has been given to us, that grants us and allows us this freedom. That's madness. That is just sheer madness. And we're doing this to whose hurt? Our own. And as a nation, yes, we are headed toward socialism. I didn't think I could live long enough in my lifetime to ever think that would be a problem. It is. It's a serious problem. And so we're going to vote our way into socialism. One day we will shoot our way out of it. Because every nation that's ever been subjugated by socialism, i.e. communism, had to shoot their way out of it or just live with it. And that's what we're doing. Now, how insane is that? And you can almost see God looking at Israel, the old Israel, supposed to be a righteous and holy nation, blessed by God. And what did they do with all those God-given blessings and freedoms? Squandered it. God looked for justice, and what did he find? Oppression. I'm not even going to talk about what I heard covered endlessly today on the news. It's just ridiculous. High-handed crimes are just wink, wink, nodded at, and we've got people digging up every minor infraction they could possibly think of because you happen to be in the wrong political party. We are in a bad way as a nation right now. There's no justice. But if there is, there's a justice system for one group and another for a different group. I mean, it doesn't apply equally across the board. And that's unsettling. It's unnerving. How did we get here? Well, God blesses nations, and God expects those blessed nations, just like he expects blessed families and blessed churches and blessed individuals to whom much is given. What? And you had a comment, Brother Brian?
Yeah, God through his prophets then described Israel as being a bunch of fat cows laying around on their
Amos.
Are we any different?
He actually described the women that way, but he wasn't a popular preacher. They asked him to leave town. Probably doesn't go over well when preachers call women fat cows, but he did.
We're more worried about sitting on our sofas and watching ball games or dancing with the stars.
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Instead of defending what we have.
We're entertaining ourselves into numbness. We think we can numb reality.
Like a drug addict.
Yeah, like a drug. And we do. We turn on our TV, watch movies, watch Netflix, whatever, and we get lost in this fairyland. And meanwhile, the world around us is burning to the ground.
We're not preserving it for our kids.
That's exactly right. That's the unfortunate reality. We're losing it before our very eyes. What are our grandchildren going to do? What kind of world are they going to inherit? We really need to wake up. And as a nation and culture, we have been in a slumber far too long. And it starts with churches. It starts with Christians. It starts with us. I'm not just talking about America. I'm talking about our culture. I'm talking about the people in this country. I mean, the country's hopeless if the people that make up this country aren't turning back to God. I don't care how great America is. America can't survive without Christians maintaining what we once have been blessed with. We're going to have to simply turn back the clock if we can and see if we can't see another revival. We've been through some tough times as a nation, but I don't think we've ever been teetering as much as we're seeing now. We are literally one election away from being a socialist nation. That's frightening to me. Anyway, that's just kind of a side thought. The real problem is that people are losing their souls. And as a nation, we've lost our soul. When governors of a state can actually advance the idea of infanticide, we have lost sound leadership. That is grotesque. That is just horrible. You know, I've been criticized a lot in class this week. We were talking about non-conforming gender people, whatever that's supposed to mean. It's madness. We're talking about all this stupidity. I'm like, that's just ridiculous. I mean, you know, you're not assigned a gender at birth. That's insane. I mean, there are some genetic defects, but it's very rare. Other genetic defects, you're born a dude or a chick. A male or a female. I've been in school all week. But anyway, we're born that way. And you try to expose the folly of the reasoning today. And people are like, huh? Why are you getting so upset about that? Just live and let live, man. That's right. Fellow officers, just live and let live. Just stop getting so worked up, preacher. I'm like, you don't have any idea, do you? If you don't know if you're a boy or girl, I don't know what to tell you. Yes?
Well, these same people promoting that are the same people that have fought so desperately for decades to instill.
Taught what?
Fought for decades to instill and teach evolution.
Oh, yeah.
Which at its ultimate end, evolution is survival of the fittest, right? Well, these outliers don't know what their gender is. According to evolution, should just be.
They should be cleared away. Yeah, if it's fuzzy for you, yeah. That's a world without God, by the way. That's Hitler's world. Anyway, you have a song? 809 in your songbooks. Ain't even started yet. Who's crying? 809. I'm just learning now we have a men's luncheon this Saturday. It's 12 o'clock at the American Pie Pizzeria in Carrollton. And so all the men are urged to be in Carrollton at 12 for the pizzeria. Where's the American Pie Pizzeria? Where's that? Maple Street?
Down near the college.
Across from Parkwest.
Oh, yeah, okay. I know where that is. I used to drive a Ford. Gospel meeting hosted by West Georgia starts this Sunday and concludes on Wednesday. Brother Frank Chesser. Monday through Wednesday will start at 7 p.m. Don't forget the pantry unloading day. We'll receive our next load of items for the Midwest Food Bank the 5th of March. If you would be willing to volunteer your time to help unload the truck, please be here at around 11:30 that morning. Friday night fellowship, March the 8th, starting at 6 p.m. Please bring snacks and games. Any questions, please see Jordan or Lydia Stubblefield. Also, a youth devotional hosted by Bowden on Sunday, March the 10th at 4 p.m., followed by dinner at 5 and worship at 6. Any other announcements along those lines? Yes?
Yes, if you're going to the Deacon Seminar at South Cobb, tomorrow is the deadline to register.
Okay. They'll kill you tomorrow if you don't register for the Deacons Seminar
At South Cobb.
by tomorrow.
Yes, by tomorrow.
Drop dead date, right? Okay. Brother Brian Howard had part of his heart frozen today and part of his heart burned today in a procedure to get his heart back in rhythm. Regina had something similar to that, but she wasn't frozen, but she was burned a few years back. But Tammy assures us the procedure went well. He's still at Kennestone Hospital and hopes to go home tomorrow. They did have to put him under. They didn't know they'd have to put him all the way to sleep, but they did have to put him to sleep. But he is recovering, and they hope he will go home tomorrow, and hopefully he'll be back to his old self again when he gets his heart back in rhythm. Brother Roger Davis, has he been moved to Rome?
No, he's just going up there for one day, we learned.
Okay. So he's going to be staying in Carrollton Nursing Rehab for the, okay. Brother Gentry is back with us tonight. It is so good to see you here, brother. We've missed you, and it's just not the same without you, and we're glad to see you here tonight. Anyone else we need to mention on our prayer list? God does so much for us. And that's what the prophet Isaiah was reminding Judah and Israel about, is how much God had blessed them, how much God had provided for them. But with those blessings, God expects certain things. You know, when John said, we love him because he first loved us, God has expressed his love to us, all mankind. But he certainly expects some response from us. And the hope on his part is that we will respond in love ourselves. And because of his great expression of love, we will in turn respond to him in loving, obedient faith. Through gospel obedience, living according to his will, walking in the light. These are the things that God expects of us as we go about bearing fruit as branches, knowing that we are connected to the vine. Are you connected to the one true vine tonight? Are you a member of the body of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? Have you obeyed the gospel? Do you need to do so tonight? Can we assist you in this or in any other way? If so, please make that need known while together we stand and as we sing.
Through at the door